Our next panel is on the role of politics, and I'm very pleased and excited to introduce our moderator, Sarah Cunningham, who is the Managing Director of the World Wellbeing Movement, without whom this event would not be possible. So thank you, Sarah. She's also the host of the Working on Wellbeing podcast series, and has been partnering with the WAHASO team for many years now, not only on this event that we're hosting here today, but on several other critical initiatives. And so I will turn over to Sarah to introduce the panel.
Thank you so much, Caesar. Well, I have such an honor to introduce this panel. Just before I do, very quickly, at the World Wellbeing Movement, our mission is to put well-being at the heart of decision-making, both in business and public policy. We are a movement. We cannot do that in isolation. And so I want to thank every single person in this room because you are part of the movement. But there's somebody I want to give a very, very special thanks to and a very sincere thanks, and that's Karen, because it has been the greatest honor collaborating with you, Karen, on bringing this to life. So thank you so much. And without further ado, this panel is on the role of politics. Now, it warms my heart to see well-being-oriented politicians working collaboratively across party lines to put well-being first. And Dr. Vivek Murthy has already referenced and thanked our first panelist. Tracey Crouch was the world's first Minister for Loneliness. Tracey is also a former Minister for Sport and Civil Society, and she chairs or co-chairs a number of well-being-oriented all-party parliamentary groups, as does our other brilliant panellist, Kim Leadbeater. So Kim Leadbeater swapped a career as a lecturer and practitioner in physical health and well-being to become a politician. And there were some very personal reasons for that, which Kim will fill us in on. But like Tracey, has been leading a number of well-being-oriented all-party parliamentary groups. And I really feel it's so powerful today that we're hearing from two incredible MPs from different political parties as to how they've been putting well-being first. So without further ado, Tracey and Kim. You're both very welcome. Can I check, can everybody hear us okay? Fabulous. I thought it would be nice for you to introduce yourselves a little bit more and maybe tell us a little bit about how you're connected, because I know there's a very special connection here, and a little bit about your shared beliefs. Maybe, Kim, I could start with you.
Yeah, fabulous, thank you. Hello, everybody! I hope you are all feeling well at this wellbeing conference. So I'm Kim Leadbeater. I'm the Member of Parliament for Batley and Spen up in West Yorkshire in the north of England. And my journey into politics was a very non-traditional journey and a very unique journey, unfortunately. I'd had careers doing various other things, and then in 2016, my sister, Jo Cox, who was the then MP for Batley and Spen, was murdered in the constituency that she represented. And after Jo was killed, I spent a number of years working on issues that she cared about. And loneliness was one of those big issues. And through the work of the Jo Cox Foundation, the charity that we set up in her name, we did a huge amount of work on loneliness. And then in 2021, the lady who had taken over from Jo as the Member of Parliament for Batley and Spen, which is the area where I live and where we grew up, went on to another job. And a number of people said to me, "Why don't you go for it?" And I said, "No way." And a few more people said, "No, you think you'd be really good." And anyway, long story short, I didn't want someone to become the Member of Parliament for our area who didn't have a very strong connection to it. So I was eventually persuaded. I went for it, had quite a nasty by-election that we went through, but then I was elected in July 2021, so I've been an MP ever since. But what I've tried to do in that job is champion a lot of the issues that I had covered both prior to Jo's murder and since Jo's murder, and a lot of those issues were around health, well-being, social connection, including loneliness. And I met my amazing colleague Tracey Crouch through the work on loneliness, and I'll let her talk a little bit more about that. But since then, we've developed a lovely cross-party friendship. We play on the women's parliamentary football team together. She's a very good footballer. I bring a lot of energy and enthusiasm. I'm a bit crap at football, but you can't have it all. So yeah, and we do a lot of work on stuff, but particularly around loneliness and well-being, because it's issues that we feel passionately about.
Well, good morning. Unlike Kim, I haven't had high sugar content breakfast this morning. So I'm Tracey Crouch. I've been the MP for Chatham and Elsford for 14 years, since 2010. In 2015, I had the privilege of being made Sports Minister by the then Prime Minister David Cameron. And then tragically, Jo was murdered, and I had a wider portfolio at that point of civil society as well. And the next Prime Minister, Theresa May, was very passionate about supporting the work on loneliness. And when the Jo Cox Foundation made some recommendations, including delivering a strategy, but also having a minister that could reach across government, Theresa May made me that minister. And although I'd met Kim before, we certainly sort of kind of developed our relationship, our friendship, through that process. And I was really proud to be made the world's first loneliness minister. It certainly brought a huge amount of conversation in through the doors of DCMS from around the world, actually, in terms of the issue of loneliness. But I think that when I left government, voluntarily, I hasten to add, I wanted to still remain passionate about the issue of loneliness, and we got together and formed the all-party parliamentary group on loneliness and connected communities. Snazzy sniffing title, and have continued to talk actually around the world on the issue of loneliness together.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Kim, for sharing such a personal story and for the incredible legacy that both of you have achieved. I also have not had as much sugar. So
I actually haven't had any sugar, so don't give me any sugar.
But one thing that really strikes me, and I've been so lucky to get to know both of you over the past year, neither of you took the traditional route into politics. So you had a prior career, Kim, you were a lecturer in physical activity, you've a degree, I believe, in physical activity and sports science, and you've also worked as a personal trainer and in the industry, which I can see you'd be very motivating.
Or annoying.
And Tracey, you previously worked in the private sector for quite a number of years as well. I might start with you, Tracey. Did you find that maybe taking a non-traditional route into politics has given you a different focus and maybe also developed your own passion for putting well-being first?
I'd say I have a semi-traditional route into politics in that I did my last exam at Hull University on a Thursday in 1996, and I started working in Parliament the following Monday. So I sort of kind of did that role where I came in, I was a researcher. In those days you could be a researcher for many MPs, and I worked for 5 MPs, only one of whom survived the 1997 cull of Tory MPs. And then I went out into consultancy, then I came back, and then I went out and I worked in the city for 5 years, and then came in 2010. So, what it did is it enabled me to have a really sort of kind of a broad span of different industries. As a consultant, I gave advice to traditional financial services companies, but I also work with a lot of charities. I work with some really interesting trade associations, the Toy Association, the Pet Association, all these sorts of different things. So it enables you to sort of kind of look at things in a different way. But I spent 5 very happy years working for Norwich Union that then became Aviva. And we went actually did a speech together at Aviva last year before, about what big companies can do in terms of looking after the well-being of their employees, and that very much focused, we put a focus on that as well in the loneliness strategy, and that was born from a little bit of experience of being in the city. And if you're not born in London and you're moving into London, for professional reasons, you do have a heightened sense of loneliness, and your well-being can be really poor. And actually, we found in the statistics, when we did the first cut of statistics, that people who are moving into urban areas for profession can sometimes feel very acute levels of loneliness. So seeing some of the things that companies are doing, and Aviva, my company, was very good at connecting people, just small things like making sure that there were opportunities to be together. This was pre-working from home days, but be together and down your tools and have a conversation, not a conversation about work, but about general things. And I think that's what we sometimes lose sight of.
Thank you. And Kim?
Yeah, so my sort of career history spans lots of different things, and I did actually start my career in the private sector. I used to work in the furniture industry. I used to sell beds, of all things, and I was a national account manager, so I travelled up and down the UK selling beds into retailers. So that was my initial career, and then I went back to university as a mature student at the age of 25 and did my degree in health-related exercise and fitness, because I found that was my passion. And actually, interestingly, I went to a good local school, a grammar school, not a fee-paying school, but a local grammar school, and we were very sort of narrow in our career choices that we were given. So the idea of working in fitness or health or well-being wasn't, you're either going to be a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher. It was quite narrow. So it took me until 25 to think, actually, this is the subject I want to study. And then I was really passionate about that. So physical activity, health, well-being, that's what my degree was in. And then I went on to teach and 2 local colleges in those subjects. So again, working in the further education sector, I think the further education sector is a sector that gets overlooked a lot. We talk a lot about schools, quite rightly. We talk a lot about universities, quite rightly, but also FE has got an important role to play. So I did my lecturing. I also ran my own business alongside that, as you say. My speciality was cheesy 80s aerobics classes. So lots of star jumps and jumping up and down to things like Wham and Bonnie Tyler.
And neon.
And lots of leg warmers and crazy music and stuff. So, but actually the power of that, it wasn't just about people's physical well-being, it was about their mental health and well-being, it was about the social connection. Getting the people to leave the room after the exercise class was a challenge because they wanted to stay and they wanted to chat. So that well-being agenda was always there from the start of that piece of work. And then, as I said before, after Jo was killed, I worked for the Jo Cox Foundation, so I worked in the voluntary sector. And that is one of the reasons that I feel so passionately about how this work has to be done on a cross-sector basis. Everybody has something to bring when it comes to well-being, loneliness and social connection. It has to be done through the private sector, the public sector and the voluntary sector. And I guess because of my own experiences of all of those 3, I see their strengths and I sometimes see the things that they could do better. But Tracey alluded to it, which company doesn't want a happy, healthy workforce? You'd be mad not to. And even if you don't want that because it's the right thing to do, it is your bottom line. If you've got people who are coming to work every day and feeling good about their jobs and they're not off sick and they're not struggling with mental health, they're not struggling with addiction and various other issues and things, then that's good for your business. So why would you not want that to be the case? And that's why the work that I've done since becoming an MP has focused a lot around the health and wellbeing agenda. And I'll give a plug for my report, which I launched last year, called Healthy Britain, which purports to explain the importance of the cross-sector approach that we need, but also, and again Tracey's alluded to this on the loneliness work, the cross-departmental work that needs to happen at a government level. Because this is everybody's business. Well-being and social connection and loneliness. The good thing about that problem is everybody can do something about it. Whether you are a business, whether you're a charity, whether you're a sports club, whether you're a place of education. And that's what needs to change, I think, for us to really drive the work forward on this.
Yeah, thank you. And I really want to dive into the importance of cross-party collaboration. Before I do, I believe you're going to lead a very quick 10-minute aerobic demonstration.
If the demand is there for aerobics, I will do it.
But no, before I do that, Vivek Murthy gave us the most enthralling keynote this morning. And he talked about, his policy and advice recommendations for overcoming and tackling loneliness. And I wanted to talk to you, Tracey. The first question I have for you is, when you were appointed Minister for Loneliness, did that change your view of what loneliness is, who it affects, and what we need to do as a society to tackle it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like many politicians, when I got elected in 2010, we talked about loneliness, particularly around Christmas and particularly in relation to older members of society. And one of the things that Jo certainly did when she entered Parliament was to change the sort of kind of perspective on that. And she talked about her own personal experience of loneliness, but she also talked about different parts of different generations, different cross-sections, but we didn't really sort of kind of get into great detail in Parliament about it. You know, there was this real stereotypical approach where we always sort of kind of did the go knock on your neighbour's door on Christmas Day and check they're okay, and aspects like that. When the foundation did its work and then sort of kind of produced its report for government and then for us to then take that on, it became very clear, very quickly, that this wasn't about one particular sector of society. It was about every part of society. And we started to sort of kind of look at measurements and you know, the statistics which we were showing at that stage back in 2017, pre-COVID, 2017, 2018, really worrying sort of kind of statistics around youngsters. But in the strategy, we ended up sort of kind of showing this pathway of life where all the points, you know, where you could experience loneliness at all points. And it was quite personal as well. There were so parts of the brilliant cartoon that was drawn for us, you know, I had some very personal input into. For example, we talked about when you become a new parent. Now, most of us would leap straight to a lady pushing a pushchair, but I changed that to a man because my husband had taken shared parenting leave and found that he couldn't go to any of the local parenting groups because they were all mother and baby groups, and he felt very isolated as a consequence of that. And so we tried to show that it didn't matter what stage in your life you're at, you can be vulnerable to that feeling of loneliness, that feeling of disconnection. But we also tried to very much remove the stigma around loneliness. And I think, you know, Kim talked about everyone can do something about it. There is an element of us as well as individuals recognising the importance of understanding that loneliness is a thing, and that, you know, you can, once I think recognise loneliness within yourself, try and seek help and support, guidance, signposting, however you wish to do it, into things that can help you as an individual as well. There were lots of, you know, really interesting things about the loneliness strategy. We cut it up into different sections where different departments could be doing different things. You know, it became very apparent that actually, as politicians, as government, at all levels, both central and local, you know, we have a role to play, but also that we were creating loneliness through some of our own policy decisions, whether or not we were building communities that had big gates on them and no communal space, you know, whether or not we're getting rid of the local bus service that connected a rural village with the urban centre, all sorts of things that we were doing as politicians that were having a negative impact. So how can we switch that around? How can we create communities that don't bring loneliness? How can we tackle that before it's an actual issue? And that was the interesting thing about the strategy, is it sort of kind of ripped away all the stereotypical views of loneliness, who it impacts, but also what we can do about it.
And so I guess thinking about, I love to ask people for their 3 key achievements, but last time I asked you that, you told me there's many more. But when you think about your key achievements during that tenure as Minister for Loneliness in terms of tackling loneliness, and you know, Kim, you may have some as well from the Jo Cox Foundation recommendations, what would they be?
So the key achievement, which was actually nothing to do with me, I was just there in the hot seat, was actually being appointed Minister for Loneliness. I think that the minute, I mean, everyone in here knows how brutal our media can be, and how something like that appointment could have been really mocked by the British press, and actually it wasn't. And for that, for me, was a really important sign that people understood what the problem was, and that I only got mocked in one place in the whole world, and that was on the Stephen Colbert show in America. And actually, by the end of it, he'd almost talked himself into the point that there was an issue and that people needed to do something about it. And so he sort of kind of started off with this negative position and ended up completely understanding why it's happening. So that is a sort of kind of key achievement. Actually getting people together, because people were at that time operating in silos themselves, ironically, and so sort of kind of people that were campaigning on eradicating loneliness in older people weren't necessarily talking to other people. They were talking to sort of kind of Age UK and all the wonderful civil society charities that deal with that. They weren't necessarily talking to other people within those throughout the whole spectrum. So connecting people, and then I think sort of getting some money behind it, getting some. It was a small amount, but at one point we had very specific pots of money that was going into trying to connect people. And trying to get money out of anyone in government is in itself a huge achievement.
I mean, absolutely incredible. I want to ask, changing slightly to measurement, because you mentioned measurement earlier, Tracey, and I'll go to you with this one, Kim. In the UK, and I know Dr. Murphy also talked about how profound this was, we've now been measuring life satisfaction in a representative sample of the population since 2011. How important is that measurement of well-being?
I think measurement is really important, and it's going to be even more important going forwards, because whoever is in government, there's going to be a lot of pressures, and there's going to be a lot of pressures around the economy. So what we have got to do, and Professor Richard Layard has done a huge amount of work on this, is look at how we can start to monitor well-being in terms of the wealth of the country. So the wealth and the health of the country are intrinsically linked as far as I'm concerned. So whoever's in government, we are not going to have lots and lots more money to keep throwing at the NHS and various other things. So we've got to look at prevention and early intervention, and the ways that we can save money by looking at the cost savings of having a healthy society. So we've got to monitor it. You were saying there this has been monitored since 2011, did you say? I've been doing some research just this morning looking. So we've got these well-being monitors, we've got living standards, we've got this, but I don't really know much about that. I don't know if anybody else does. So even though it supposedly is being monitored, I don't think we're doing a very good job, because we're not talking about it enough. We're not talking about how important it is, not just to monitor GDP, but to monitor health and well-being and the positive impacts of having a healthy society. So even though there are some tools there, I think we need to be doing much, much more of that. And ultimately, again, whoever's in government, I'm going to have to go to Rachel Reeves, who hopefully will be our Chancellor, and say, this is actually about saving money. It's not about spending money. So we've got to look at how we can make the positive case for the health and wellbeing agenda. And that goes into what Tracey was saying before about, getting this embedded in every department. So if we get transport right, if we get housing right, if we get, the levelling up agenda right, and if we do all those things, we will save money. So we've got to monitor positive health and well-being in a way that means something in terms of the economy of the country. And I think we're doing some of it, clearly, but I don't think we're doing enough, and we need to be doing a lot more.
Yeah. You've echoed the words of a former Taoiseach, Irish Prime Minister, who famously said, a lot done, more to do. And it sort of feels like this is a journey. Tracey, since 2011, many other countries have followed suit and are now also measuring population well-being. And since then, I believe Japan has appointed a Minister for Loneliness as well. So it's great to see other countries have been learning from what's been done well here in the UK.
She was the first. Let's be clear, she was the first.
But what can we here in the UK, what can politicians here in the UK learn from other countries when it comes to more positive change?
So we did look actually at other countries who were doing, I think, really good things that we then sort of kind of tried to steal and replicate in some of the things that we wanted to look at. In fact, actually, one of the nice things about the appointment is that I did receive a delegation from Japan, but also Scandinavia, from Canada. Obviously, I met Vivek, and we also had New Zealand, and so on. So we've, in that process, in that very short period of time that I was the minister, I met quite a lot of people. Even now, I'm still talking to other countries. South Korea, something really, really passionate about the issue of loneliness. But I don't think we've got all the answers here. Mm-hmm. And, you know, some of the things that I looked, so let's just dive down the stereotypical older people's loneliness. Actually, I think other countries do retirement living really well. And we don't necessarily do that as well here. I was just talking to Vivek and his team and sort of kind of saying, go read the Thursday Murder Club, right? Because that's the retirement community I want to live in when I'm older, where it feels a lot more sort of kind of connected. And yes, it's fiction, but why should that be fiction? And I would, in meetings, I would say, look, we need a few more Floridas in this country, because it feels, now I'm saying this as a English woman who's not lived in a Florida retirement community, but from what I think they are, you know, it actually sounds like it's a really great place to go and retire in. It's got this sort of kind of connected aspect to it. So I think that that's sort of kind of what we can learn from those communities. And if you look at things like the blue zones that we're now talking about, a lot of that is the intergenerational work and living together. So I think there's a lot we can learn from other countries, but they are still coming to us thinking that we somehow have all the answers.
Yeah, and the reality is nobody has all the answers.
There is no. I mean, the thing is there's no one cause of loneliness, so therefore there's no one solution. And I think that's what we must always remember. There isn't this sort of kind of magic aspect to it, because you know, it's very subjective. And actually what might work for me isn't going to work for Kim, who clearly just needs some neon and an exercise class. Whereas, you know, it's all going to be very different for each people.
I hear you. I'm being told we're about to go to questions, so get your questions ready. I'm going to finish with the final rapid fire question. So my rapid fire question to both of you is, I started by saying how heartwarming it is to see both of you working and collaborating together across party lines to effect change. In some ways our society has become more polarising than ever before, and this is why it warms my heart meeting both of you. Can I get quick words from both of you on the importance of cross-party collaboration to really put wellbeing first?
Well, the first thing I'd say is actually there's more cross-party collaboration than people think there is, because actually people only ever see Prime Minister's Question Time, where you've got two men basically shouting at each other and pointing fingers, and actually that's like for 30 minutes of a 60-hour week in Westminster. So there's more of this than people ever realise.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There's a lot more goes on behind the scenes on a cross-party basis, and not just on the football pitch. But yeah, look, it's fundamental. It's the only way I will ever work. You know, you find the subjects that you care about, then you find your allies and your friends who want to work on that subject. And sometimes they're in your political party, and sometimes they're in other political parties. And that's the only way to work. And look, the reality is in this country and in the US and elsewhere, people are very disillusioned with politics. People are disengaged, they think we're all idiots and all the rest of it. The only way to change that is by showing some of the good stuff that does go on and work like this, which is really important. So it's in our interest as well to get people to engage in politics by showing how it can be done well, and not just the horrible divisiveness that sadly we're seeing far too much of at the moment.
And can I just say, I see Chris there. Chris is former Labour MP, and you know, he and I did some work on mindfulness together and went travelling to other countries to talk about the power and importance of mindfulness in politics. And actually, I think, certainly under Chris's leadership, you know, getting involved in mindfulness, it's made me a better politician. And, you know, and I think the way that we talk about mindfulness and personal well-being has changed in the time that, you know, I first started it. So it happens all the time.
Yeah, and here to Chris, who's been one of many, many supporters of the work we're doing at the World Wellbeing Movement. So thank you. Questions?
Thank you. What a fabulous panel discussion. Mark Williamson from Action for Happiness. I wanted to ask about intergenerational well-being. I was struck recently hearing about a project which is based in Chester, which brings a nursery school for young people together with older residents in a care home, and just seeing the amazing well-being potential for both of those groups. Also, I had my teenagers dragged to an 80th birthday party recently and was pleased to see that intergenerational connection, but also recognizing that that's quite rare in their lives and actually across society. So I wanted to get your thoughts on how important is it to the well-being of our collective nation to have intergenerational connection, and how do we get more of it? Thank you.
Well, firstly, I follow Action for Happiness on Twitter, so thank you for bringing a bit of joy into my life in the mornings. I actually think the intergenerational work happens more than we think it does. Certainly in my own constituency, I quite often go to care homes, and they are connected to a nearby primary or nursery. I think they definitely encourage grandchildren into the environment, but we can definitely do more of it. And I certainly know that there is, I know of the project you talk about, but I think there's also more structured, kind of living arrangements as well, where people are trying to mix the communities up as well, more so perhaps in other countries than here. But it's definitely something that is proven to help both with the older population in terms of their feelings and emotions and connection with the younger people, but also the other way around in terms of generating levels of respect and listening skills and understanding skills and things like that. And it can only be a good thing.
Yeah, I think it's really, really important. And I think that the challenge is, where are the places and the spaces for those connections to happen? Sadly, we lost a very good charity in this country called the Cares Family, who were doing huge amounts of work specifically around intergenerational stuff, and they would have young professional people who had moved to a new area for their job, connecting with older retired people who knew the area well and had got very good local knowledge, and they did a really good connecting piece there where they would have coffee mornings and social events. But again, sadly, funding is a problem for projects like that, and they've lost their funding, so sadly they've gone. The stuff that we did through Jo's foundation, through the campaign called The Great Get Together, which we do every year on what would have been Jo's birthday, is exactly about that. It's exactly about bringing people of different ages, different backgrounds. So we're talking about intergenerational, but we're also talking about cohesion, people of different faiths, people with different levels of ability and disability coming together. But you've got to sometimes create those places and those spaces to do that. I generally default to sport and physical activity. So we put events on, around, we do something called the Run for Jo. It's not about the running. It's about the connection. That's what it's about. Food is obviously the best way of doing it. So let's have an iftar. We do an iftar up in my constituency. Let's have a bake-off. Let's do those things where children can get involved, older people get involved, everybody can get involved. And actually, the differences are suddenly all forgotten about. And it's the commonality that we focus on. So there's a huge amount of work to be done in that. But again, that does need political leadership. Sadly at the moment, I'm fighting for libraries. I'm fighting for sports centres. I'm fighting for some of those places where those things happen. We've got to keep those things at the heart of our communities, or those opportunities are going to become less and less rather than more and more.
Do we have time for one more? We've time for one more question, yes.
Yes, Stuart Wallace from the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, and previously New Economics Foundation, where we did 5 Ways to Wellbeing and Happy Planet Index. I'd like you to say a bit more about the role of inequality in society, in a healthy society, because there's just been a paper, for example, by Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett in Nature, where they reckon that the UK would save 100 billion if it got inequality down to the level of the most equal countries in the OECD, the Nordics and others. And that's just on a few measures like how long people live and how healthy their lifestyle is, mental health, those sort of issues. So inequality in all its dimensions, please.
So we had Chris Whitty come and give a presentation to the all-party group last week on his recent paper about this issue. And he was quite clear that this is all down to inequality, or rather that it's certainly exacerbated by inequality, and it's an enormous challenge. I have a constituency of 2 halves in Chatham and Aylesford. Chatham is a very high area of deprivation, very urban, very mixed, and whereas Aylesford is not rich, but it's more affluent. And you can definitely see the difference between the two. In fact, there's a stark difference in terms of longevity and also types of disease. And it's a real challenge, because actually what we're tending to do, particularly with things like top-down housing targets, which I have a really personal view on, is that you are then creating more inequality. You know, if you're telling areas like Medway that you have to build 25,000 new houses in an area that's already deprived and lacks the infrastructure to support those inequalities, then unless you're building all that, which you're not, then, you know, it's only going to get worse. And so it's an enormous challenge. I think, you know, we would both share the view that you go into politics to try and make things better and easier. You don't go into politics to sort of widen inequalities, but sometimes things that you do have that impact, and things that you try to do to reduce an inequality doesn't work. And so I think that's the sort of kind of challenge that we as national politicians face, is that what might work to reduce an inequality in one area, like, you know, potentially London, for example, will not necessarily work in deprived communities in Kent.
Yeah, it's a really, really fundamental question, isn't it? I mean, we've done work with Chris Whitty, as Tracey said. I've done various things with Michael Marmot, who is the lead voice on this subject. Bless him, he's been doing this for decades. I can't believe he's still beating the drum, but it's so fundamental, because there was a report that he did recently about quality of housing and damp homes and cold homes. If you're struggling in a damp, cold home, the last thing you're going to start thinking about is going out for a walk, you know, or looking after, you know, your health and well-being. So the fundamentals have got to be right, and that's where the politics does kick in. We've got to make political choices that address inequality as a starting point for a lot of this sort of work. And looking, you know, housing, transport. Again, if you can't get a bus, you're not going to be able to go and do something that might stop you being lonely. If your housing is rubbish, and like Tracey said, you know, you live in a high-rise block of flats where you don't see another human being for days. So unless you start looking, if you can't feed your kids, you know, if some of the basics aren't there, you're not sat there thinking about mindfulness or well-being more broadly. So it's a fundamental problem. There's lots more could be said about that, but you've hit the nail on the head.
And if I may just add just one thing, forgive me, but it is why I'm very much of a view that we should have a wellbeing budget. And, you know, New Zealand's wellbeing budget, what 5-6 years ago, was very much around sort of kind of the reducing deprivation and inequalities. Some of the Scandinavian countries have wellbeing budgets. And I think that it can just add a different dimension into what it is, what the purpose of government is. So it's not just about sort of kind of prevention in terms of getting people to the point where they're not, you know, disease-ridden or whatever, but actually it is having a proper focus.
I'm being told we're out of time. I just want to wrap up really, really quickly. I wish I could continue talking to both of you forever, because this is fascinating. Yes, they've both been on the Working on Wellbeing podcast by the World Wellbeing Movement, so longer conversations with both of them. I recommend you tune in wherever you get your podcasts. But very, very quickly, you've been talking about all the different drivers of wellbeing, and you mentioned your report at the beginning, Kim. I thought maybe a nice place to finish might be showing this diagram, which comes up on screen on the podcast as well, but of all of those different drivers of wellbeing, and that it really extends across our...
Yeah, no, absolutely. Until we take a proper, holistic approach to well-being, I don't think we'll get to where we need to be. So, you know, you're right, there's a little diagram in here. It's just one example. There's different variations of this, but, you know, financial security. Unless people feel that they've got enough money to do the basics in life, you know, leisure activities, security, the environment. You know, we're basically talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, aren't we? You know, if you get the basics there and you feel safe and you've got enough money, everything else sort of follows on from that. But sadly, we've got a society at the moment where some of that stuff is just not happening and it's not being met. So it's how we can address those, and that is about political choice. But it's also about political choice at a national level, and Tracey sort of alluded to it, the devolution model. What does it look like locally? locally? How can we give decision-making powers back to local areas? And also then the bottom-up approach. The voluntary sector does so much heavy lifting on this wellbeing agenda. Charities, groups, grassroots sports clubs, all that sort of stuff, we need to support them properly. So you end up with a top-down, bottom-up approach, and that's where the magic happens in the middle. And then you put the cross-sector side of that in, getting big businesses involved to understand the importance of wellbeing. That's the way that we're going to get the change that we need by taking that very holistic view.
We're way over time, but I think it was worth it for those final words. Thank you to two wonderful, brilliant women.
If you enjoyed this amazing well-being content, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.